careers in art, all kinds, studio art, graphic design, art history. She's done stained glass, she's done workshops, on and on and on, and her combination of faith and art are so amazing. She's also been a writer, and she has written some of the curriculum that we have used in our women's studies. So we're just so happy to have you. She is currently at Luncheon Presbyterian in Gaffney, and amazing things do come out of Gaffney. It's wonderful. She's an ordained minister. She has an MDiv that she got from Union Presbyterian Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry from Pittsburgh Theological. She's a painter. She designs textiles. I could go on and on. She's amazingly talented, and she uses this work through our Lord, and we're so fortunate to have you. Dr. Lynn Miller.
Do you want that done? Okay, she's just gone.
I'll just stand still. Hi, Carol Eyrick, I miss you. I'm sorry not to see you in person, but we will. I do want to thank you for the invitation to be here. It's always interesting to move to a new presbytery where no one knows you. So for a year, I've been like under the radar, and it's been great. And then the presbytery called and was like, all right, about that committee assignment. So it is lovely to become part of life in this presbytery, and y'all's was actually the first church, aside from Limestone, that I ever saw, because I had to come here for my COM exam and in the parking lot. So I am delighted to be here. When Carol asked me, she was like, well, can you come talk about art and faith? And believe me, I can go on for hours about that. So I decided to see about focusing, and rather than talk about kind of that relationship, I thought we might explore something together. So I'm kind of riffing on the first lesson from the Bible study for the Sacred Encounters, the upcoming study. So, okay, there you go, exactly that. Look, thank you, yay, AV. I haven't looked at the lesson, so if you think you can skip your circle meeting for the first one because you've heard the lesson, you can't. I just borrowed the sermon and the concept, and we're moving on from there. And where we are going next is to this very unassuming little parish church about 10 miles from Florence, Italy. It is the parish of St. Michael and Francis in Carmignano, which is in Tuscany. But it's a church that no one knows. So if you're looking back going, never heard of it, that's good. You probably shouldn't have. But it is home to this painting, which is the Visitation. Jacopo Pontormo is the artist. He's a Mannerist artist. Mannerism comes right after the Renaissance. So in the Renaissance, of course, everything is all about precision and perfection and the human form that's always perfect. And then Mannerism is the modern art of its day. And they're like, well, what if we don't have perfect human forms? What if we stretch it a little? What if we pull it a little this way? What if we play with lots more color than those Renaissance artists would let them do? Now, I have to do quick art history on this because it's just such a good story. So, in part, we're going to talk about this painting because it was recently, 3-4 years ago, underwent conservation. Before that conservation treatment, it looked like this. The varnish on it had yellowed, and it's in this little church that's out of the way, and no one cared for it. And finally, somebody came along and said, we should look and see what's in that painting, what's under there, because they could tell, I mean, look how yellow it had gotten. The Sistine Chapel had been cleaned, and all of those colors popped to life. So the examination began, the cleaning began, okay? Yes. Here's a detail, a before and after of the figure that's on the far left. So you can see the difference, and you know, cleanliness is next to godliness. So it's true with paintings as well as small children. So we get to the painting that looks like this, and in 2019, it made its first trip ever outside of Italy, and it came to the United States, and has kind of taken on a new life because of that. So, this is the way the painting ended up, but there is a sketch, okay? Oop, color, sorry. There we go, there's the sketch. Of how the artist originally drew it. So, in the next slide, okay, you can see it wound up pretty close to the artist's original intention, which meant there was some thought already happening. There are some changes, okay? Oh, one more, I think I have one extra in there. Oh. Okay, go back one. There we go, we'll go back to full. So, it's a large painting, it's over 6 feet tall. So you can tell proportionately it's going to be 3 or 4 feet wide. These are over life-sized figures. And it's an interesting arrangement. They think the composition was based on another artist's work, but that work was an interior. And here Pontormo has put this scene happening outside. Okay? This is what it looks like if we travel to that little church outside of Florence. It's an altarpiece, so the bottom of the painting is 4 or 5 feet off the ground. So when you encounter this piece, it really does loom over you, these 4 women doing whatever it is they are doing. Okay? There are, and I'm sorry you can't see these because this is kind of pointless, in the background there are some little details. You can see slightly darker part, there's 2 windows, and in the left window there's a servant hanging out the window. Literally, she's leaning out the window, okay? And in the upper story, these are all in the building on the left of the painting. In the upper building, they have laundry hanging out the windows. There's sheets or blankets or bedspreads or something that's draped over the windowsill, okay? And down at the bottom left, there are 2 male figures that are completely insignificant to the rest of the picture. And this is the best. So I'll send you, or you've got the file and you can see them. There's a little donkey that's peeking its head out around the corner of a building in the very background, down at the bottom of this scene. And the question becomes, why? What is it that all those details are adding to this particular subject? Okay? And what is this subject? If I didn't tell you what the name of this painting was, could you identify the subject? You could say it's 4 women. There are 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Maybe it's Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah. Maybe it's Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, or the Mary, the mother of Jesus, and 3 women who went to the tomb. There aren't really any outward signs that are going to tell you what this subject is. Modern takes on the visitation, this visit of Mary and Elizabeth, as the illustration in the PW study book does, has 2 obviously pregnant women, or it'll show you kind of an X-ray version of little babies in wombs, or in the illustration in the study, they're both carrying sonograms. So you know that that's what the point has to do with that function. But here you don't get any of that. It's just women visiting, women meeting on the street. So this thing is happening here. These 4 women are together. There is a sacred thing happening. And the rest of the world, the rest of this picture, they don't even get it. The donkey may be the one that's most attentive of all, so there's a whole big thing we could do with that. But those 2 men, who are they? They're so small, you can't identify them. There's conversation that that's Joseph and Zechariah, but probably not. The men are dressed in contemporary 16th century clothing, where obviously these women are in what we perceive biblical clothing to be? How did this subject happen? And what can we do with this subject as Pontormo painted it as we think about sacred encounters? Okay. There's a video clip, and I had hoped to show it, but apparently there's a copyright issue, and while I believe that y'all would visit me in prison, I really don't want to test that theory. Bill Viola is a contemporary artist, and he has kind of rethought some of these famous paintings, and one of them is this Pontormo painting of the Visitation. He created a video work called The Greeting, and it is almost what happened before the scene in the painting that we get to. So he shot this video. If you run it at regular speed, it takes 45 seconds for Mary, the Mary figure on the left, to enter the scene and for the two women to embrace and to do that. But he slowed it down so that it takes 8 minutes to watch this happen and see them move and watch the flowing skirt that moves when Mary moves, or the embrace that happens when Mary and Elizabeth meet. That idea of movement, of moving together, it's what we do, right? When we're at a family reunion, when there are people we haven't seen in a while, there's that need to move. And because of contemporary technology, Bill Viola can do what Pontormo could not do. So, okay. For Pontormo, the movement has already happened. It's like Mary and Elizabeth have already reached out and hugged and then pulled back from each other and are just kind of looking at each other. Remember, they know things that nobody else in that town knows, and they're just looking at each other. Do you feel excluded from their conversation? They don't care what you or I think. They're not looking anywhere but at each other. And interestingly, the way we get brought into the story in this version of this painting of the story is by the two women that are facing us. They are staring right at us. Where Mary and Elizabeth don't care about us or anyone else, these two women bring us in. Okay. In the original study, their faces are much sadder, those two women. And it may be harder to see, but there's a sadness in the picture, a sadness in their eyes. Okay? But by the time the painting comes along, these two women that are facing us are more maybe thoughtful. The question still is, though, who are these two women? You can, there are all kinds of suppositions. One supposition or one question is that these are actually Mary and Elizabeth facing us, where they're facing each other. And then this is like their shadow selves that are then looking at us. Probably not willing to say no. It's more likely that they represent two servants, one for Mary and one for Elizabeth, which tells us more about 16th century Italy than it does about 1st century Palestine. In Pontormo's day, a woman's never going out alone. She will have a servant. So we have these two women, roughly counterpart in age to Mary and Elizabeth. You can see the older woman that is between Mary's face and Elizabeth's face, wearing the same kind of garment as Elizabeth in the same color. You can see the figure to the left of Mary is a younger figure. Maybe, I kind of laughed as I was looking at this. It's like, look at the difference in their head coverings. For Elizabeth, and we're going to presume her servant, they're completely covered. And all of a sudden for Mary and this younger servant, I think this is sort of the Renaissance equivalent of the messy bun, right? Because it's kind of wrapped and there's hair hanging down and it's just a little looser. It may speak to a generational difference in Pontormo's understanding of how that works. But notice too, if we say these are two servants, their heads aren't lower than Mary and Elizabeth's. There's no hierarchy in this picture. Their heads are equal, their eyes are pretty much equal. What does that mean in light of this story? There's a tiny sliver of a halo over Elizabeth's head and over Mary's head. But otherwise, you would never know that two of these people are, in the story, more important than the others. Look at how the light shines on their faces. The light is coming in from the left, which means that the servants each have half their face in light and half in darkness. That Elizabeth, the profile of Elizabeth is all in light. But the profile of Mary is completely in shadow. Why? What does that mean? Do you think this is an encounter that is bringing comfort or joy? Or is it just bringing news? I love their hands and their arms. This wasn't a quick hug for these two women. They hugged, then they held on while they started their conversation. The spring gathering of Presbyterian women in the Presbytery of Mississippi was pretty much the last thing that happened before the world shut down in 2020. But even by that point, we knew we couldn't hug. We were bumping elbows, which is distinctly unsatisfying. Because for people we hadn't seen, that's what we wanted. We wanted to be able to hug. Here, that's Mary and Elizabeth. These two women who are having experiences like no one else in the world, they need each other, and they're holding on. You know, visiting without hugs isn't really visiting. Sacra conversazione means what it sounds like. Sacred conversation, holy conversation. And I think one of the ways we know that this is holy conversation is because, or maybe it's just because I'm from Mississippi, they're barefoot. Now you can make all kinds of jokes about being barefoot and pregnant, but I'll remind you that Moses was told to take off his shoes and be barefoot because he was standing on holy ground and he was not pregnant. Think about the conversations you have when you really get comfortable with somebody. I was thinking about my college friends. When we all get together, that's kind of how we know we've gotten back in the groove, is that we're sitting around talking and everybody has their shoes off. Because if you still have your shoes on, it's like you're with company. Of course, at my house, you come visit me, I'll probably be barefoot and I'll invite you to be too. It's almost a dance that happens. Can you go back? Elizabeth's foot over on the right, her foot is off the ground. Her heel is off the ground. Mary's feet are positioned as if they've just moved or they're just getting ready to move. There's a dance that's going on here as these two women have gathered and then had conversation. Okay. So, heads, gaze, hands, feet, all tell the story of this conversation, this holy conversation. It's public. It takes place on a public street in Florence with identifiable buildings, but there's no one around except for those two little people and the woman who's hanging out the window. But Mary and Elizabeth don't seem to care. They are focused on their meeting and their news and the conversation they'll have at each other. They look at each other. The other two women look at us. These four women are the color in this place when things are gray. They're the touch when things are separate. They are relationship where things are sterile. They are abundance where there is restriction. They are joy where there is cheerlessness. It's what we can't see or hear that's the story in this painting. It's their conversation. What brings them here, two distinct generations of women together for their conversation, is the fact that they are both part of God's story. Mary has traveled to Elizabeth's home so that they can share and celebrate that realization. So I wanted to introduce you to an idea. The book is called Girlfriend Theology by Dory Baker. Dory is a United Methodist clergywoman, and this is a new edition of the book that started out as an effort to help girls and women think and talk theologically based on their stories. So I'm going to walk you through the steps of what it means. What it means to do girlfriend theology. So, okay, yep, next. So the first step of this process is that you gather together around a table. Women, girls, just girls, girls and women, multiple generations, one generation, around a table where sacred space is created. That idea of table, I think, is crucial. When my grandfather died and my grandmother was going to live with an aunt, my mom and her siblings broke up their house, and all of us grandchildren were invited to make a list of what we wanted, and we gave that list to our parent, and then our parents decided what we got off the list. My list had one thing, well, it had one big thing. I wanted their dining room furniture, because how many times around that table did I hear stories of my family? Did I hear witness to faith? I mean, a huge part of who I am happened around that table. So I'm happy to report that if you come visit me, I'll invite you to sit at that table. Because other cousins wanted just the table or just the buffet or just the china cabinet, but my aunts and uncle said if Lynn wants it all together, it should stay together. Sacred space around the table. The second step is that there is a story read by one of the people at the table, a story from life that they have previously written. Previously written is an important part of it because it allows you to think about and frame the story before you get there, that you don't have to depend on relying. The people at your table hear that story as you intended. So you share this story of your life. And then, third, there's a conversation answering the question, where is God in that story? And together, around this table, for teenage girls, watching teenage girls do this is tremendous because they begin to understand God is in their story as well. Where is God in the story? Okay? And then finally, what does it remind you of in the tradition, our tradition? What are the implications for the future? So only after you've identified where God is, do you then bring in those other influences? What else do we know about this from Scripture, from family history, from church history, from whatever the tradition may be? And then what will hearing this story lead us to do into the future? So think about this story in light of those 4 steps. Hear the story from Luke's Gospel. In those days, Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and exclaimed with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord. And then Mary sings the Magnificat. And the chapter concludes that Mary remained with Elizabeth about 3 months and then returned to her home. Gather and make a sacred space. Tell the story. Look for where God is in the story. Think about tradition and think about the future. Girlfriend theology is this story in a nutshell. The private is made very public here, but the public isn't watching for it. And it's dependent on Mary and Elizabeth to say it and make it real for them. These women don't miss it. They call attention to the fact that God is moving in their lives. They call attention to it in their holy conversation. It's unlikely that this painting is ever going to travel again outside of Italy. So we will have to get together and take a road trip to Italy to go visit it. But the subject of this painting, we see this all the time. Women talking with other women, women sharing stories of their lives, women helping each other see where God is moving and working in their lives. That's what this story is about. And for all of us as people of the church, as Presbyterian women, we're always asking ourselves the question, what do we need to be doing for the next generation? How do we get, the infamous phrase, younger women involved? Listening to their stories has to be one of those ways. It's set out for us right at the beginning of Luke's gospel. It's set out for us at the beginning of our study of sacred encounters this year. It's set before you every time you sit at a table in this room or anywhere else. So I hope you'll understand that every conversation you have, even if you're wearing shoes, is a holy conversation. Thank you. Questions, observations? Or I'll sit down. I'll sit down.
Somebody raised their hand, I think. Did someone raise their hand?
I was just wondering, with the women in the background, they weren't even looking at, I wondered if they were feeling that they'd be intruding in their space.
That may be it. If they felt they were intruding in this conversation and they're just looking, but that's how they pull us into. It's a good observation.
Oh, no, there's no one.
I didn't want to make a snarky comment, but
Oh, I love a snarky comment. Sit by me at Presbyterian.
the significance or lack of significance of the man, I think in a woman's conversation or what is important in that moment, I think it's
Absolutely. And it's funny that because of the position of the painting, really what's on eye level for the viewer are those two insignificant men who are doing nothing. I mean, they're just sitting there. And all this other stuff is going on, and they're oblivious. And don't you know, they're, probably made some smart aleck remark about, oh, they're just talking.
something better to do.
Exactly. Some of us have to work for a living. So it's a really interesting, and the fact that the artist is male. So go Jacopo.
Or that he even put them in there. I mean, that's interesting in itself. Was it necessary to somehow have them in there?
It's a question. Would the church have taken the painting if there weren't any men in it? I mean, I'm dangerous territory and I know it, but I'm just gonna say 2 words, Barbie movie.
But even the laundry and everything in the background, muted, doesn't take precedence in this moment.
Interestingly, the building to the right of them is a prison in Florence. So it's a really good and beautiful and bright and colorful painting for the women, and the rest of it. Before they cleaned it, that blue sky, which is really gorgeous, was black. I mean, because everybody was like, "Oh, it's a night scene." No, it's dirty.
So I know that in some art there are certain like animals or creatures like snails or cats or something that have significance. Does donkey have significance?
There's no record of what it's in there for. 2 things, of course, come to mind. Look, a test. Two incidents that are going to have to do with a donkey. Maybe it's how they got there. Where else are they going to get? Where else is Mary going to get her out of the donkey? Bless her heart. 400 months pregnant, riding a donkey for whatever miles. You know what? I know a really funny joke about that that's inappropriate, and I won't say it here. But if you want to know, see me after. Carol, I'll call you. So what's the second donkey story that's going to be related to Jesus? Palm Sunday, the entry into Jerusalem. So, and which of those prophets is it where your king will give the prophecy about your king coming riding on a colt, on a donkey? So that's the question. I mean, and it's really a cute little donkey. I mean, because he's just, you just see his head. It's a very odd detail. Yes, ma'am?
What do you think the other artwork in the church is? I mean, to have this huge painting of women is
That is a
very
really
different.
good question.
Could you repeat the question?
We have to take a field trip to repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. What other art would there be in this church if they've got this huge picture of women? I do not know, because and I don't mean to be unkind, because I'm sure there are lovely parish of people, but really it's just not that important at church except for this piece of art. So probably nothing that's, I mean, and it's not a church that's related to a convent rather than but that's a really good question. And Pontarmo was kind of the rock star of his day. I mean, Michelangelo knew his work. While Michelangelo's in his prime, Pontarmo's a 20-year-old. And Michelangelo knows his work. So, how did it get to Carmignano? I'm betting it was like his mama or something, son, give him a baby. But I'm gonna go research. I'll let you know what else is in that church. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was so informative, and so I think we'll look back at this this meeting and just think of so many more questions and so many more maybe stories in our own lives. And now I'm curious how we might have those. I already forgot the name of it.
Girlfriend theology.
Girlfriend theology conversations here at Eastminster, because I think that would be very valuable, especially since we have so many incredible youth who I would love to hear where they hear God is in your stories and where we hear God is in their stories. So I hope that you will continue to think about that, and maybe we can find time to make that intentional to hear about God. I don't think there's any other, to my knowledge, any other part of today. I think there's a little bit more food if anybody's still peckish. You're welcome to continue to have conversations around your tables. There's no rush to leave, but thank you so much for coming, and thank you to all of the women who helped make today happen, because I'm here and I'm speaking, but I didn't do anything. So thank you to Carol and all of the other wonderful Women's Circle ladies who have made this happen. And I also wanted to go ahead and announce, when is the first Women's Circle? It's on the calendar. The second Thursday of September. So
Is that the book? Is that where the devotion is gonna be done?
yeah, so the books can be, I don't know how much they are. They're $10 and they're in the office. But yeah, Women's Circle meets at 10 a.m. the second Thursday of each month, and we'll be back starting in September. So if you have any questions about that.
The first meeting's at Patty Mitchell's house.
Okay, first meeting's at Patty Mitchell's house, so we can get you all of that information if you would like to join them. But they have a great group of ladies, so I hope that you will consider doing just that. But thank you again.
It does look like that was a picture it was for the study. But of course it was COVID, so it's a selfie in my supply closet. And I just